let's address the issue of transparency and information asymmetry. Now, I can go back to conversations that I've had in the last 1 week with the most celebrated startup founders in the country, where when you ask them that, look, you're making these claims and you're making them publicly, that I'm profitable, this is my sales number, so on and so forth. Can you back that up with data? Can you back that up with numbers? And the answer point blank is no, I'm not entitled to giving you that information because I'm private. Now, how far or how long do you believe this culture of convenient silence, and I'm calling it that because on one hand, you're happy to go out there and sell the story and say, we're number one in this, we're number one in this, or we're doing so much and so on and so forth. But when you're asked to back the claim, you hide behind the veneer of being private. Now, can this culture of convenient silence lead to the kind of situation that we're seeing across many startups today?
So, Shireen, I have a long track record of being very direct. I don't think we as a sector and large number of startup founders, including the celebrated investors, we can actually hide behind convenience anymore. And I'm not saying it because a couple of episodes of irregularities have been found or some ED raids have been made. I'm saying it because I genuinely believe that we have a great opportunity for this startup ecosystem to actually become world-class. And if we have to become world-class, we have to understand that cutting corners with governance is going to be the biggest damage that we can do, not just to us, but to brand India for what we stand for. And I think, remember that the kind of money that we can attract to our young entrepreneurs, and as Alok said, impact, scale, and creating value, I think the only difference I have between what Alok said and what I am saying is I am a great believer in value creation. I have a lot of problem if we only chase valuation. And so there is a very minor difference, but it's a massive difference. And it actually comes into the way of you following governance, ethics, and being held accountable for the claims you are making. And therefore, recently Amitabh Kant actually goaded us to hold a small conference or a small gathering where some 30, 40 young entrepreneurs also turned up. Some of us were also there, where the discussion was, how do you actually make the governance issue a critical issue? Because as we talk about Startup 20, we are also actually taking our thought process. I mean, Startup 20 is essentially government trying to stamp its authority as the G20 president to make startup equivalent to B20. Now, this is our great opportunity. And then you actually have governance as an issue. It concerns everybody because we are going and telling the world that we are the third largest ecosystem, we become the largest. I think governance will define whether we are a potential or we are a potential that is realized.
Well, that minor major difference that you spoke of, it's not all that minor at all, Vineet. But let me get Alok to respond to what we just heard there from you. And Alok, I think Vineet is not the only one in that camp that believes that a lot of what has gone wrong in the last few years has to do with this, obsession of unicorns and wanting to be one, being wanted to seen in the company of one. But outside of that, my larger issue of information asymmetry, how much of a problem do you believe that is today? And related to that, how much of a problem is it that we're overselling the story, to the point where it could in fact not just be misleading, but be blatantly false and a misrepresentation? How worried are you that overselling is actually misrepresentation and falsehood?
Shri, honestly, I'm not hugely concerned about that, right? I just want to kind of put this in perspective. The world's biggest satellite company sold the satellite before they built it. Were there risks to that build? The answer is yes. Right? Entrepreneurs start with a statement of vision. And in the broad media space, this vision appears far earlier than the reality. When that same entrepreneur is sitting in front of an investor trying to raise money, those investors will dive into, what is the capability? Is this vision for real or not? And so on and so forth. So there are different audiences to which, different kinds of information get sold. But the reason why startups can get to being a unicorn, whether we want to chase that as a goal or not, is irrelevant. The reason they can get there is because they can sell a promise much in advance of that promise getting realized. And I think that is really the space for startups to exist in. I would focus on what are the tangible issues that are coming out, right? And in my mind, a lot of these issues have to do with the fact that when startups grew slowly or stayed small, the negative impact that they could have, and I will call them externalities, were largely limited to the startup and its investors, right? Now that impact is far more widespread. When a marketplace fails, a lot of its suppliers or people who have registered on the marketplace as businesses in themselves, they fail.
Yeah.
When startups go through massive hiring and firing cycles, employees fail, right? When startups go through volatility, customers fail, right? There is data risk around it. So there are a lot of these externalities that are getting built up because of the rapid scale of startups. And we need to figure out what are the right checks and balances to make sure that these externalities are not spilling over to people who are not willing to take that risk. See, the investor is willing to take the risk of losing $200 million, right? A taxi driver is not, right? And we need to figure out that in this high risk, high reward mode that the startup is running to, how do we systematically protect other stakeholders who are not signing up for that risk and reward? And that is a question that I don't think we've answered as an ecosystem. Some of those answers are beginning to appear. The standing committee has now come up with certain proposed regulations around systemically important large digital intermediaries. I think that is again trying to protect the externalities, of building a great business very quickly.
Yeah.
But then protecting the other stakeholders who have no stake in the risk reward of that startup, but largely are affected by it. So I think that is the real issue in my mind, not vaporware.
No, I agree what you're saying as well, that what we are now seeing today, just because of the scale of some of these companies, is the fact that the collateral damage is not just for the investors in question, but it is much larger than that. And, the employees bear the brunt of the action. But Anirudh, since we are talking about tangible steps, now in light of the experiences that we've seen, in light of what we've seen happen and the points made by both Vineet and Alok, what do you believe we need to do individually as founders, as companies, as investors, and collectively at the ecosystem level as well?
Great question that you've asked, Shireen. I think, one of the things that needs to happen post-investment is there needs to be better oversight. I think there is this whole concept of being founder-friendly, which means that you have a very thin layer of oversight, and you don't look at things objectively. You don't look at, sometimes MIS reports will not come on time, or, the quarterly board meetings won't happen. And that's okay, because you're being founder-friendly. I think we need to get out of this mode of being founder-friendly. We need to be company-friendly, because whatever is good for the company and its stakeholders is good for everybody that is involved. And I think we, as investors, as founders, we need to put that additional level of oversight on ourselves, be responsible, like Alok said, towards all the stakeholders. Because when a large company fails, it's not just the founders and the investors who've lost money, it's an entire ecosystem that has lost trust on the next innovation that is going to come through, right? And that is something so critical and so important that we need to focus on. And I think there needs to be much better board action that is taken within startups, and that boards are a lot more active and involved with the kind of statements that a company is putting out. I mean, just to put it in perspective, it took 18 months for Byju's to file FY21 financials. They today would be the 30th most valued company in India, and the company right above it is JSW Steel in the listed space. Would it be okay for JSW Steel not to file its financials for 18 months? I don't think so. So we need to get serious about that as a board, as a founder, and as an ecosystem.
A very important point that you've raised there, Anirudh, and let me get both Vineet and Alok to conclude this conversation on exactly that. How do we ensure that we put checks and balances in place, especially investors who are sitting on the boards of these companies, of these portfolio companies, by the way? And Vineet, I want to understand from you, from your own experience, what needs to be done to ensure that boards operate as being company friendly and not, to use Anirudh Damani's term, founder friendly?
So this is actually a challenge that will not go away that easily. But I think let's actually look at the ecosystem, because I think some of these things will be individual driven, investor driven, founder driven. But how do we actually look at it and take a step back and look at it? I will take you back to 2010, Shireen. You will remember the microfinance crisis. And when that crisis happened, an entire industry got wiped out. But as a response to that crisis, we launched an institution called Microfinance Institution Network, which is today one of the most powerful
Yes.
self-regulatory organization this country has ever seen. Now, what we probably need to do is to create self-regulatory organization, which are not only for investors. So we should create one for investors. I mean, we have SEBI regulating all of us. Then you have Reserve Bank of India regulating non-banking finance companies. Technically, registrar of companies regulate every company, but the kind of intensity and changes that are taking place requires the startups to be regulated by themselves. Now, because there are a large number of startups, we may actually have to really think through how a startup SRO will work. But if you can put together an SRO that actually has the power to take to punish as well as to give a rap on the knuckle, and SRO has the power to both actually recommend as well as actually to punish. That would ease the life of the big regulatory organizations. Most of the time, they will come with a very heavy hand. And second, it will allow young entrepreneurs to actually deal with the challenges and be in close, constant touch with a regulator which is friendly, aware, and understand their challenges as well. So, to me, I think that's one of the ways to go forward.
Alok, it's an important point, and I want you to address that. Vineet is suggesting that an SRO, a self-regulatory approach, is the way to go. We've already seen the government say, look, do that as far as the gaming industry is concerned. Do that as far as the edtech sector is concerned. In the need for agility and dynamism, which is, of course, the need of the hour, we don't want heavy-handed regulation. We want light-touch regulation. Is this sectoral SRO approach, like we saw with MFIN for the microfinance sector, a practical approach as we move ahead?
So, Shri, in my mind, SROs have worked well, when the domain has been sectoral, because there are a lot of elements of code of conduct and behavior norms that can be interpreted in context of a particular sector. Really, the lowest common denominator of all companies is, what is represented by the MCA today. There are, for larger companies, several governance indices that do get tracked. So in my mind, rather than a regulatory framework, I think a monitoring and a reputational framework is something that might have more teeth without interfering in how startups function. There are obviously elements of growing large and posing systemic risk around data privacy, customer conduct, things of that nature, where there is already impending regulatory activity. But other than that, I think the notion of having a governance index that measures, all large startups, and large may include people who have raised large amount of capital, large number of employees, or large revenues. That kind of an index can start to provide even investors with a counterbalance of saying, here's one thing we want to check, right, before we commit large dollars to a particular company.
Okay, so an SRO, self-regulatory body, perhaps sectoral, that could be a way forward. A governance index, that could be potentially one of the ideas that Alok Mittal is putting on the table to consider for the road ahead. Anirudh, in 10 seconds, what would you like to add to this list of things to do?
I think investors need to align on what are the standards they're going to accept. I think a founder should choose an investor whether they give better terms or have better capabilities, but not on whether they're going to be friendly with transgressions or they're going to give friendlier terms with lesser oversight. If we can align, I think if the investors align, I think the startups will align as well. I think that's something that we should definitely do as investors.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for some very important insights that you've brought to the table. This is, of course, going to be a continuing conversation. We're not done with it, but we do hope that at least some of the issues that we've spoken of, that through the course of these dialogues and these conversations that we are having, that we hold up a mirror and help address some of the challenges that we are speaking of today. We hope that these issues do get addressed. But Vineet, Alok, and Anirudh, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on Young Turks. Thanks very much for your time. We will take a break here on this edition of Young Turks. For now, from all of us here on the team, goodbye and many thanks for watching.